Welcome back to the Hardwood Hustle, and the champ is back again. So we are getting a double dose. We're getting 2 episodes out of Bob today. We are squeezing him for everything he's got, and we're going to probably splinter off a couple different directions here. But one of the things we're going to focus on in this episode is scouting. I know that for coaches, we're always looking for an edge, and there is an edge in scouting. And the reality of scouting is there's a lot of different ways to do it. But nobody's probably had more experience in doing it than Bob Starkey. Bob has done it at multiple schools, multiple different times for different championship teams, whether it's conference or national championships. And Bob, you had a tweet recently where you started talking about scouting, and coaches were just eating this up. And so I just want to start from the very beginning, and let's just share your overarching thoughts about scouting, because you had some outside the box things that I think coaches aren't thinking about in scouting. But I would love to know just your overall philosophy to begin. When you're going into find out this opponent we're about to play, what are your thoughts about scouting, and where do you start and how do you begin?
Well, first of all, let me just preface this. I started scouting very, very young. It was the first assignment I got. I was in college and helping the high school program. And I learned more basketball scouting than anything else, going to clinics, reading books, because I would go and watch how different coaches did different things. So I think having a mindset that this is a great way to grow as a coach and not necessarily something that I got to do makes a big difference. Some important things to me, I like to do prep work. We have a couple sources for some analytics that I'll pull up, and I love analytics, but they are not the cure-all. I tell everybody they're like a GPS for me. I look at them and they kind of point me in a direction, and I've got to go get the evidence on film. I do pull up the individual stats, and I know who shoots the threes and who gets to the free throw line and who's on the offensive boards. But then I've got to go to the film and find out how they're doing this. But I like getting that information up front. I'm a big believer in watching full games. I want to get a feel. I want to know coming out of a timeout when a team just came out of a poor segment of play, what's their go-to play. And you can't get that by watching clips off Synergy, though I do use Synergy. We use everything available. But I've got to watch whole games. And when we get in the SEC play, I'm watching probably 10 to 12 games. I'm looking for games where they played really well to try and figure out why. Games they played really poor, so I can try and figure out why. I'm looking for games where they played against teams that are like us, either in terms of personnel or system of play. And then I got this from Gino one year. We were sitting courtside in the summer at AAU. We were talking about scouting, and it was really profound for me. He said, he's not real big into patterns anymore. He's more interested in concepts, like teams are getting shots at the elbow. Not so much they're running this play, that play, this play, that play. Now, certainly we're gonna jot down plays and look for calls and all that, but teams have DNA. Are they a ball screen team? Are they a post feed team? Are they a move without the ball team? So we're going to look for concepts. The next thing I think is really important is you got to figure out how much information can your team handle. And without question, less is more. Without question, less is more. Study Tim Elmore a lot. Who is, one of the leading experts on how to communicate with this generation. So we've altered our scouts to where they're shorter. There's no paragraphs. There's not even any sentences. It's all bullet points. Kim does a unique thing. When we go over scouting reports, we hand the written report out to the players, and we have the players stand up and read parts of it. And then the majority of things that we want to do, we get off film, and we expect our kids to take notes. So I guess that's probably a long-winded answer, but those are some of the things that just kind of come to the forefront for me.
That's so good. And you posted a tweet, said, big key in scouting, how much information do you give your team? I promise less is more. Don't try to impress your team with all that you know. Give them what they need to succeed. TJ and I coached together for 2 years, and we were putting together 19-page scouting reports And to TJ's credit, I don't like to credit him much, but he said, you know what? He said, we're not doing that anymore. We're doing one-page scouting reports. We're going to give them just the nuts and bolts. And it was so good, and it's so true. That was 20 years ago. Sometimes we as coaches, we want to teach the other team's baselines, the blobs and their sobs, and their favorite 5-set plays. And our kids don't even know our own stuff. And we want them to know the other teams. So, like, there's a individual piece, the individual scout, and then there's the team piece. And you even said later, I'm getting long-winded here, but it's like, what does that girl do? What's the one thing we need to know? Like, but maybe speak to the less is more comment.
Well, I think you nailed all of it. You can only load so much into kids' heads, and it's a battle for their attention anymore. Their attention spans are shorter than they were. I started back with the 15-page scouts too. I think video is more important than ever, but even that has to be in short segments. If you're watching 15, 20 minutes of film, I promise you, I hope you put the good stuff in the first 3 minutes because they're going to check out. Now, show them a little bit of film here, maybe show them a little bit of film here, but you don't need that motion picture. Probably the most important thing to me is I think every team has that one thing that makes them good offensively. That's what I want to take away. We refer to it as the head of the snake. Like for instance, Iowa, it was the paint points. Our kids are going to know that we're going to stress paint in practice, in film sessions, in team meet. We're going to stress that one thing. Not necessarily the 18 plays that they use to get the ball to paint. We're going to use our principles of play of how we take paint away. And then defensively, we want to pick on the one thing they do poor. And, with only a few exceptions, Lord, South Carolina was one. There wasn't many weaknesses in that defense at all, but you can't guard everything. So where are they weak at and how are we going to attack that? I really think if you can take away what another team does, you're going to be pretty good. If you can take away option one, you're going to be pretty good. If you take away option two, you're going to be humming defensively. But without question, the more you give them, the less they're going to retain. I also think packaging is really important. So if I'm going to tell the kids that the paint's important, I got to show them some clips on the paint. I got to make sure that a breakdown drill or two are in the paint. When we're doing pre-practice with our post players, we're going to talk a little bit more either about our low post defense or coming over quickly. That there's got to be some correlation in what you're doing on a day-to-day basis to back up whatever it is you're doing with a scout.
Yeah. Hey, I got about 4 or 5 things here, and I want Bob and Sam, give me your feedback on these things here, okay? I'd like to know your thoughts on this, but I think it's a common mistake for coaches and scouting reports to just cover their own butt, to make sure I've got everything out there and not pay attention to maybe what it means to the learner. And I would give you an example. I've had our coaches do this before, and then I'll ask them, well, what's that mean to the player? So they'll say something like, hey, really good shooter, off the catch, really good at this, drives the ball really well. When they get in the paint, they're a great passer. They're a good offensive rebounder. They get, they cover off everything. And so what does that mean to the learner? I mean, would you say that's a common mistake that we just give them that much information? So for the defender, that means what? Like, I have to have the absolute best game of my life and I have to cover everything you could possibly think in. Does that help the learner? And I think that happens a lot in coaches, just covering your own butt. Would you say that's accurate?
I think so too. I had this conversation with Mike Neighbors. A lot of coaches, especially the young ones, when they scout to impress. They want their players and their coaches to know, I saw everything. Where, like, for instance, in our scout, we're going to give you 3 bullet points on an opposing player, but they're going to be prioritized. Like, for instance, if we're guarding what we call a dead 3 shooter, that means that kid is 40% or better from the 3. Take away the touch. If she gets the touch, chase her off the line. Boom. If you get beat off the bounce, then we've got to rely on our principles, our help, our recover. But this is the one thing we're not going to allow this particular player to do. One of the things I love to do as a scout is is there somebody out there we don't have to guard? If there's somebody out there we don't have to guard, we can stick them in the paint and have some fun with that. But I do think, and the better the player, the simpler it has to be. You cannot take away everything. And if you're giving your kids all that stuff, then you've loaded them down. I'm trying to think who it was. Maybe was it Majerus who? No, I think it was Tarkanian. The more you think, the slower your feet get. And I think sometimes we're guilty of giving them too much information.
Yeah, absolutely. We use that quote all the time in our program: "Slow feet don't eat." And
That's
when
awesome.
when you're overloaded with thoughts going on in your head, you're not going to do the things that are going to make you instinctive as a basketball player. So I think that is really, really important. One of the things that we do, almost exactly like you just said just to get clarity to our players as coaches, getting your message across is just really, really important. So they're not overthinking. We put either a green, yellow, or red next to a player. And a green that's the dead shooter, so just a different articulation, but the dead shooter, they've got to put it on the floor. They are not catching and shooting, they've got to put it on the floor. And so we want no space between your chest and their chest. And then we go yellow. Look, we want a hand in the bubble. So you're going to close to the shot, but they can also dribble it. They can do it. And then red is the one you can have a little bit of fun with, right? And we say double arm length away, pretend like you're guarding them, but don't guard them, like just that. And I think those articulations really matter. And we have different times. Here's my second thought. Bob, and I want to know what y'all do on this. We have more time in college to prepare for an opponent, right? And so some of the information we give to a high school coach or a middle school coach, or you've got to make it age stage appropriate, and you got to use your time efficiently. So if you have an hour for practice, I'm not sure I would do an hour scouting report, because those players are still developing their skills, and you need to make sure that you're doing that. What does the process look like for you as a college basketball coach? Let's just say that what is your split on playing? Do you guys play like Wednesday, Sunday? Do you play, what's your normal split like in conference?
Yeah, when we get in the league, we play Thursday, Sunday.
Thursday, Sunday. So how would you approach like the 2 days out from a game? Are you doing any bit of the scouting report? Are you just working on habits, or are you just focusing on your team? And then you get 1 day out, you get shoot around. Like, what does that process look like?
Well, for us, what Kim likes to do, so we play Thursday, Sunday. We come out of Thursday. On Friday, she wants to present the report before practice. And what that looks like is I'll come down in front of the team. They'll have their written report, and the players will read their assignments, who they're going to guard. Every person will read something, and then we'll show about maybe 5 minutes of their offense. And then the next day we'll come back in, we'll reread the individuals again, and we'll show about 5 minutes of their defense. And then practice, maybe 20, 30% of practice will be towards scouting. The rest of it will be on us. This is who we are. You mentioned something about red, yellow, green. We do that with practice jerseys. So, with us, we have male scrimmage guys that come in, and they'll have a red, which means they can't shoot. They'll have a green, which means they're a dead three, and they'll have a yellow, which is what we call a both. And we'll use those in practice. And I think this is important. We use those before we ever get to season. So it's November, and we're doing some defensive segments, or maybe we're doing a little bit of scrimmaging, and we got those jerseys on just so we can start working on concentrating on guarding a concept based on who we're guarding. That's something that we'll do. There'll be a day in November where we'll work on defending the flex, because we know we got somebody in January that runs the flex, or somebody that runs the Carolina secondary. We might do that someday in December. But we'll start working on those concepts before we even get to an opponent.
Yeah, I got one more, Sam, then you take over. So there's a series of thoughts that was just kind of flowing. I was thinking about application of things that you learn. So I love the concept idea, like big picture. Do they like to play in the middle third of the floor? How much do they feed? I love that theory, because I think we can get so carried away with the play. And, I think in college we do have to know the play and the call and something like that. But that's not the most important thing, those concepts. And so Are there any things that you do, like adjusting based on a scouting report? I think of one for us that if it's a really good shooting team, our major emphasis in practice is make them a bad passing team, because I think good passing teams lead to good shooting teams. So we want a little more ball pressure. We want a little more disruptive on the cuts and fills. We want to be a little bit more, disruptive on the ball so that they just aren't clean and operating. You know how those teams just, man, pass, catch, and they shoot. So that's one. Talk about some application that some things that, gosh, this team really loves ball screens, or this team, whatever it is, that how do we actually take that into our adjustment on how we're going to play that team?
Well, an example for us would be we're playing a motion team or a passing game team where they catch and they cut and they screen and they back cut. And of course, we're LSU, so we use a football analogy. When your player has the ball, she's a quarterback. You cannot allow her to sit in the pocket and look for receivers. We got to chase her out of the pocket. So we'll use a football analogy to pressure the ball, make them put it on the floor. A big phrase that we use all the time is don't give them vision. Don't give them vision. We'll also adjust our feet based on – so if we're playing a team that feeds the low post, we'll adjust our feet so we can try and take away vision to the low post, even if it means we get beat to the middle. So we'll do some adjustments like that. We talked about shooting teams, chase them off the arc. I think terminology is really good. If you have simple, consistent terminology to defend 2 or 3 or 4 important concepts, your kids pick up on it quickly. And I think that helps with adjustments as well. So if you got to make an adjustment during the game, your terminology can help them flip that switch mentally a little bit easier and quicker.
Yeah, building on that, you mentioned football, and I know you've studied football coaches, Bob, but Bill Belichick, he may have written about this in The Education of Coach, maybe. I don't know. Maybe I heard him in an interview, but he did something, a couple decades ago that other football coaches weren't doing. You take the other team's best receiver. What's common knowledge would think, okay, I'm going to put my best cornerback on their best receiver. He said, no, I'm going to take my second best cornerback, and then I'm going to roll a safety over. I'm going to take my best cornerback and take out the number 2 receiver. And I think that's good scouting. That's good outside the box thinking, being willing to go against the grain. So that in mind, is there anything you found going a little bit against the grain, making the other team play, quote, left-handed? You've spoken on a little, but is there anything that jumps out at you from scouting that y'all might do?
Well, I do like I'll tell you something that we do now and something that we used to do. But if I've got a really smart defensive player, I like her not being on the other team's best player. I like her because she's going to be quicker and smarter to get the help. She's going to be able to make the reads defensively and see things. We did that a lot with Alexis Morris. One thing we did for a few years at A&M that was interesting, we kind of got away from it, is ball screen defense. When the ball came to the left wing, we iced it to make them go use their left hand. When the ball came to the right side, we pushed it over the top to make them go to their left hand. We did that for a couple years. By the way, there's a really good scouting book written by Bill Belichick's dad, who was one of the premier scouts in the NFL, and I've got it. And there's actually some carryover concepts. I do love studying football guys, and I think the structure in football to me is really fascinating. The way they scouting in football is off the charts. It's nothing for me I love to meet the defensive coordinator at our school and see how they look at things. But that Belichick's dad actually has a book out there on scouting. Yeah,
and first I'm just amazed by how much you're willing to share. Like even on your tweet storm you did, you got 750 emails, which I imagine took some time to reply back to all those people. But Bob, you're an amazing share of the game. And I'm working with a high school team here in Atlanta right now, and at the end of our sessions, we'll just do some what I call basketball IQ talk, situational talk, just because I want to grow their mind a little bit. Like, hey, here's the situation. You're up 3, just hit a free throw, 8 seconds to go. What are you doing? So I'm curious, and you mentioned this on some of your tweets, like What's your overall philosophy up three? Are you fouling? Are you playing it out? Is the answer yes? Like what are you doing?
Well, specifically to that question, up three, I like to foul and not criticizing teams that don't. It's one of those great arguments I think that will always be part of our game. That what I go on is I can't tell you how many times I've watched a team hit a three at the buzzer. And I'm not saying it's never happened, but I've never seen a team make a free throw, miss the second one, tip it back out. I've never seen that. I'm sure it's happened, but I've seen the buzzer beat threes to tie it up and send it to overtime way too many times. So I do think this. You have to teach those things. You have to work on those things. We have what we call a blue. Blue is how we foul. So. And it doesn't have to be at the end of the game. It may be at the end of the first half. We got fouls to give. We may say blue at half court, and that means when the ball crosses half court, we foul. Or we may say blue 17 seconds, blue or whatever it is. Or late in the ball game, blue 24. We want to foul 24. But I think you have to work on those. I cannot remember the NBA coach, but they were talking about 2-for-1s. And the way they did 2-for-1s is they call out a play and a number. The number was the time they had to get that first shot off in order to get into the 2-for-1 sequence. So I think when you have terminology and verbal clues there to help your team with those things, I think that's huge. By the way, I think special situations is where scouts separate themselves. I think coming late ball game, coaches have go-to plays, whether it's a side out, whether it's a quick, they've got go-to plays. And when I can stick my head and say, Kim, listen, they're getting ready to run that diagonal screen for the post play when they drive the ball right. That's worth a couple points right there. Or if a team likes to change defenses out of a timeout, being able to share that with your coach. Those little things I think are what really separate. I think there's a lot of people that can write down, this is what they do. This is how they do it. But when you can get to the when and the why, it makes you a little bit better. It makes you a little bit more important on that bench.
I think, Bob, to your point early on, a lot of those little nuances are tough to catch if you don't watch the whole game.
Correct. 100%.
I think that is something that gets missed. Like, we've got technology that is really good, and, Synergy will cut up everything we ever want to see, but you don't know if that came out of a certain timeout, at what point in the game it came, what was the flow of the game going on. So I think it's really important. One important reason to watch the entirety of the game and to understand the feel of the game too.
Absolutely. I learned this from some NBA guys. Coaches like to sub at specific times. Like they may take their big post player out with a minute and a half to go in the quarter to give them that long rest. Well, what can we do to attack them in the post during that last minute and a half? Being able to know a substitution pattern. But again, you don't get that off Synergy. I'm not being critical of Synergy. I love Synergy. We get a lot of stuff off of it. But that can't be your cure-all for scouting. You got to watch the games and get a feel. This is the other thing that I do. I'm not sure I got into this on the Twitter deal the other day, but this time of the year, I will go back and scout what an opponent did against us on our game. Because when you get in the season, you go back and you clip some things for team improvement, but I want to go back and get a feel for how that team played for us. I'll write it up, and then I do a full scout and a full review. I'll finish it up sometimes by the middle of June on all our SEC opponents, and I'll file it off. And that'll be something I can go to next year. Maybe they hurt us with this play. Maybe they did this. And so this is a great time of the year for me to do that. And probably the thing that I've got going for me is I got to be honest with you guys, I got a film addiction. I love watching tape. I could watch tape all day long. And, but TJ, you're right. You've got to, and you just, here's a mistake coaches make. I watch this game. Here's the scout. Worst thing you can do is a 1 or 2 game scout. No way do you know the heart of a team or the pulse of a team by watching 1 or 2 games. I watched the game on TV last night. Here's what I think. You got to get into it.
Yeah, and don't you think, Bob, it's equally important to scout your team, like your own team, because you've got to know it. I hear this a lot of times, especially like when a new assistant or a new coach, like if I see them do this, this, and this, if we just attack them like this, this, and this, and I'm thinking, but we don't do that.
Yeah.
And so you've got all these solutions on how to attack them. That means we're going to change our offense, our defense, our transition. And so knowing your team really well allows you to, when you learn the other team really well, how to tie those two things together, which I think is sometimes underestimated.
Yeah, I've been in some staff meetings with some other teams where we'll be talking about something and say, hey, yeah, I saw last night that they struggled when the ball screens got trapped. I said, well, we don't trap ball screens. He goes, well, what if we do? I said, well, I promise you we're not going to be as good as the team you saw last night because we don't teach it. Here's a great thing that I've always done. Find a retired coach and send them some game film and have them scout your team. I will guarantee you, if it's a good coach, they're going to find something that you have not noticed, because sometimes, we got blinders on to who we are and what we do. It's like when you type a text or write a letter and you don't see the mistake because you're reading it as your mind thought you typed. It's the same thing. But I've got a couple of go-to guys that are retired. First of all, they love doing it. They love being able to do a scout. But you'll be amazed at what they'll send back to you. And sometimes we'll use it with our team. Say, hey, listen, I know you don't want to hear it from us, but this is what another scout that broke our tape down saw. Says you're a little soft in the post. Now, I know you think we're trying to motivate you, but I'm telling you what a coach outside of our program saw.
And don't you think also, there's no shortcut to this process. No. When you're talking about watching 5 game films, we can't microwave that. That's a crock pot. And I think everything you're speaking to, I keep thinking about the discipline is the freedom. The preparation is the key, meaning because you spent so much time preparing, your opponent, it gives you freedom in the game to make the adjustment, because there will be a good coach is going to make their adjustment and then you're making the adjustment. But that discipline gives you that freedom. Again, there's no microwave in this thing. You can't synergy your way to knowing the whole game film, right?
No, what's the saying? It takes what it takes. Yeah. If you want to give your team an advantage, if you want to have an impact on the bench with your coach, you have to put the time in. And I do. I get in the office during the season around 6 or 7, and I start watching tape. Now, I'll come home. I'll get home around 9 o'clock. My wife will have a college game on. I'm going to another room and read a book. The last thing I want to do when I go home is maybe watch a college game on TV. I've watched enough games during the day, but you have to do what you have to do. And if you want to make a difference.
Now, hold on. Your wife is watching basketball game at home?
Man, I'm blessed.
Me and TJ walk in. I don't think our wives are watching basketball.
My wife will watch. My wife's watching football. She's watching college basketball. She loves sports. So I'm really fortunate there, except when I want the TV during the season.
I hear you. Yeah. Well, ours are too busy chasing kids, Sam. So we're allowed to do some of the things we do because we have amazing wives that are taking care of all the other things that go on. But hey, Bob, before we go, if there's anything you wanted to add, I'd love for you to share anything that you wanted to share. I want to make sure people go check you out at Coach Bob Starkey. I imagine if you're a basketball junkie, you're probably already following, but if you're not, you got to go follow him. Just so many good shares on everything from leadership to scouting to you name it about basketball. He drops his own wisdom, which is incredible, but also shares things that he learns. He's such a great sharer of the game. But Bob, before we go, is there anything else you want to share with the coaches?
The only thing I'll add is, one of the things that kind of took off the other day. Sam alluded to 750. By the way, it's a little bit over 2,000 now. I just sent out about 6 or 7 more. I made a thing that I have created, and this was back when I was a high school coach, a personal template that I have sitting out that I write notes on while I'm watching film so I can stay organized. And told people if they wanted to reach out to me, I'd be glad to send them the template. And what I've also done is send them some about 30-page notes of Coach Meyer stuff that I took. So if anybody wanted to email me at Coach Starkey at lsu.edu, I'll be glad to send them the template and the Coach Meyer notes. One of the reasons I love you guys, one of the reasons I love PGC is that we're all in the business of sharing and growing the game. I mean, if we're not in the business for growing people and growing the game, I don't know why we're doing it.
Yeah, 100%, Bob. That's why we love, having you on. There's so many things about our game that are great, and there's also some things pulling against the greatness of the game. And I think that's why the fight matters. And you do that on a daily basis, is fight for the goodness of the game. And we can't celebrate you enough for doing that and how well you do it. So make sure you email him, make sure you follow him at Coach Bob Starkey. And Bob, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah. Well, he is Sam. I am TJ. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Hardwood_hustle. Get some conversation going there. But listeners, thanks again for listening. And Bob, thanks again for sharing.
Thanks again for tuning into this episode of the Hardwood Hustle, where we believe in the value of a coach. Be sure to check us out on Twitter and Instagram at Hardwood_hustle to stay up to date on the latest episodes and share your thoughts with our coaching community. From the Hardwood Hustle team, thanks again. We can't wait to be with you again next week.